Hello there, welcome to session number 10, where we're going to be looking at how to cope with family arguments and conflicts. Now, I'm going to be offering you general information that covers a wide range of possibilities. So I'm going to leave you to decide what, if any, of this applies to the situation that you find yourself in. I'm going to come on in a moment and say something about the range of arguments and conflicts that may occur in a family where there's someone who's got into difficulty with their substance use. I'm then going to share with you a little model called the drama triangle, which helps us to understand and make sense of conflicts and arguments that may occur. I'll then come on and share with you a slide of ideas that other family members have found helpful for coping with and managing conflicts and arguments. And then I'll end the session with posing some questions for you to think about. Okay, let's make a start. There's a range of possible behaviours that come under arguments and conflicts. At one end of the spectrum are the normal arguments and disagreements that can occur in any family, although perhaps these ones are centred around substance use and the consequences of it. And many people who get into difficulty with their substance use don't go on to become abusive or nasty. Therefore, I wouldn't want to alarm you into thinking that there will be domestic violence in your family. It doesn't have to happen. However, as we've seen in earlier sessions, sometimes someone who gets into difficulty with their substance use can become coercive of other family members to try and force them into assisting them in their substance use. And this behaviour may become abusive, it may even possibly become violent. Coercion, abusive behaviour and violence are all unacceptable, and you don't have to put up with it. And if that's the situation you find yourself in, then I would want to encourage you to get specialist help with that, and I'll say more about that at the end of the video. Let's just say a little bit more about coercive, abusive and possibly violent behaviour. This kind of behaviour can occur in any relationship, and let's just look at a few. Firstly, it may be from a teenager or a young person towards their parents and other family members. Now, where someone's under the age of 18, it's important that their safety and well-being are considered, as well as, of course, their behaviour being unacceptable, and you don't have to put up with it. In which case, it might be important to get some specialist help with that. Also, coercive, abusive and possibly violent behaviour can also occur in adult relationships as well. So not just between partners. For example, an often unrecognised way in which it can occur is where it's an adult child, say in their 40s and 50s, who's got into difficulty with their substance use, who can be coercive, abusive, even violent towards their parents in order to force them into assisting their substance use. And likewise, this is unacceptable and you don't have to put up with it. And that may well be a situation that you would need specialist help with. And if so, then I would want to encourage you to get that as soon as possible. Now, this doesn't mean that people who get into difficulty with their substance use are bad people. Usually this behaviour is symptomatic of their addiction and that desperation and compulsion that they feel in order to keep on using. And then finally, one last general comment I would want to make is maybe you're concerned about your aggressive behaviour as well. And if you are, then I want to encourage you to get help with that too. Now then, what I'd like to come on to next is to share with you a little model. It's called the drama triangle, and it helps us to understand what happens in arguments and conflicts of any kind. And through being able to make sense of arguments and conflicts, that gives us some really useful clues in terms of how to manage them better, possibly even to reduce the amount of arguments and conflict as well. So let's come to the slide. The drama triangle proposes that there are three roles that people slip into where there can be arguments and conflict. These are to persecute, to be a victim, and to rescue the victim. And I'll say a bit more about these three roles in just a moment. But as long as people stay in these roles, the conflict keeps going. People can swap their role during the argument or conflict. And the roles that people are in come as a response to other people being in their role. Now, I guess it's easy to imagine that where there's a conflict or an argument, there's somebody who's persecuting someone else. And let's say a little bit about that role. This is where we can confuse aggression for power. And the kind of things that we might be saying is, oh, you just never understand it. How could you be so stupid? And often what this does is it reinforces someone's belief that things cannot happen without the use of force, but that doesn't mean they have a valid point. This possibility of persecuting, which anybody can do, comes from our innate response to protect ourselves or to get what we want. But once we're in the drama triangle, this comes out in a misguided way. The second role is the person on the receiving end of the persecutor, the person who's in the victim role. This is where someone doesn't stand up for themselves, but rather confuses their being vulnerable for being helpless. So it's as if they're saying something like, poor me, isn't it awful? And very often also saying, I'll never cope alone. I need someone else to come in and help me. And this often reinforces their belief that they're powerless, that others will take advantage of them, and that they need the help of others. However, very often they're not as helpless as they feel. This also comes from an innate response. In this case, it's to take flight and to avoid what it is that we fear. And then lastly, the third role is perhaps the one that might seem less obvious. And this is a person who rescues the victim and takes sides against the person who persecutes. Now, this is someone who confuses saving others for helping. So they take over responsibility for the other person, and maybe even do so when they haven't been asked to. It's as if they're saying, I'm only trying to help you. This often strengthens their belief that people are selfish and that they don't appreciate their attempts to help them. But actually what's often happening is they're not really helping, because often the most successful way to help someone else is to help them to help themselves, rather than as the rescuer does, which is to do it for them. This also comes from an innate response as well, where we all feel that urge to protect and care for others. And it comes out again in a misguided way when someone gets into the drama triangle. Okay, there's an important clarification I need to give about the victim role. The model's not saying that if you're on the receiving end of persecution that you shouldn't ask for help. Where someone's a victim is where they need help and they don't take responsibility for themselves and go and ask for it. Rather, they're waiting for someone to come in and rescue them. So I hope that clears up that if you feel a victim on the receiving end of someone's persecution, that it's okay and necessary to go and ask for help. Now, what I'm going to do with you next is to share with you an example of how the drama triangle works out in real life. So I'm going to come on and show you a slide where there are family members that are taking roles, and notice how they switch their roles and how they stay in the drama triangle and the conflict doesn't get resolved. Okay, Tom uses drugs in the home. His parents don't want him to and have asked him not to do that. And then when he does, it leads to much conflict and to arguments. Tom's dad shouts at Tom, "Don't use in the house." Now, Tom's dad has the right to be angry. Tom's doing something that he's asked him not to do, and it's reasonable that he doesn't want his son to use illegal drugs in his home. However, notice how he's done that. He's gone into the persecutor role. He's confused aggression for power. And by doing so, Dad has gone into the drama triangle. Tom then reacts by angrily saying, "You never leave me alone." Tom has also gone into the drama triangle by becoming a victim. And notice that he's a victim because his response implies that he's helpless, rather than taking responsibility for his own behaviour and acknowledging that he has done something that his father's asked him not to. Tom's mum then intervenes and says, "You shouldn't shout at your dad, he's only trying to help." So she's gone into the triangle as well, and she's adopted the role of rescuer for dad. It's as if she thinks dad couldn't stand up for himself and speak for himself, and thereby she's helping too much. Tom reacts by getting angry with his mum, so he's switched to being a persecutor now. Tom's mum then starts to cry, so she's switched to being a victim, and perhaps she's not as helpless as she feels. And then dad says to Tom, "Look what you've done to your poor mother again." So dad's switched to rescuer. It's as if he believes mum can't stand up for herself. Okay, I'd like to share some observations on the drama triangle to help you understand it better and to see how to use it to make sense of arguments and conflicts that may occur. First of all, this term drama, it just refers to the psychological games that anyone can play. And sometimes the games that we play can become abusive, possibly even violent. Now, games need 2 people or more, so not just 3. So there can be more than one person in any one of those roles. Now, we can all start a game. Sometimes we do so for good reasons, sometimes we do so by accident. And we can stumble into the triangle through clumsiness, confusion, or maybe we're just looking for a quick fix. And at other times, maybe it's because we want to win or we don't want to lose. And games tend to start when someone wants to be overly feared, so they go into the persecutor role. They want to be overly helped by other people, they go into the victim role. Or they want to be overly appreciated by others, so they go into the rescuer role. And then, of course, once the game's started, other people can join in. And games continue as long as people stay in one of those 3 roles. And it's important to note that we can switch roles during a game, as I showed in the example. I'd like to come on now and offer you some ideas that other family members have found helpful to manage and cope with, and possibly to reduce arguments and conflicts. Now, the first and most important thing to consider is keeping yourself safe and keeping other people safe. Therefore, if any of the ideas I'm going to propose lead you to feel unsafe, or you imagine using them might increase aggression from somebody else or possibly from yourself, then I would want to encourage you not to use them. Unless, of course, you very carefully worked that through with, say, family or friends, and perhaps better still with a professional who can help you to cope with somebody else's aggression or to manage your own. And that you have a plan in place to keep yourself safe, to minimize any risks. Okay, let's come on and have a look at the slide. The first idea I've got here is to make sense of what happens. And what I mean by that is to spot what are the triggers to arguments and conflicts, what are the roles that people can play and how may they change their role during an argument or conflict, what might be the payoffs and the prices to adopt the roles that they do, and then are there any patterns that tend to happen? Is there a sequence that arguments often seem to follow? This is useful information. It helps to inform how better to cope. What I would add to making sense is to understand anger. Often it's the emotion that comes when we feel we've lost control, or something is unacceptable, or we feel threatened. Therefore, anger can come from a place of fear or frustration, a place of not being understood or not heard, not being acknowledged, or a sense that something is unfair, whether those things are true or not. So it can be useful to try and recognize where someone's anger is coming from. Secondly, as part of making sense, it can be useful to consider what your part is in what happens. Now, don't forget that you're not responsible for other people's behaviour and how they treat you, but you are responsible for your part in what happens. And it can be useful to recognise that, as that is something which you can change and do something about if you feel strong enough. And if you don't, well, that comes to the next point. Prepare how to cope. This can include things like having other family members present who can support you. It may be getting specialist help from an agency who specialises in domestic abuse. And it also includes the support you can give yourself, such as finding your courage. Now, that having been said, I want to come back to the most important idea, which is to keep yourself and other people safe. Also, there may be times when there are good reasons to go along with what someone else wants and that you don't want, if you are concerned for your own safety or for the safety of others. In these circumstances, it would be good to get some professional help. Now, if you feel strong enough and safe enough, you may want to aim to reduce the intensity of any arguments and conflicts. This could include things like just letting somebody blow themselves out, not biting back, asking to slow things down, asking for time out, which could be anything from just pausing, breathing, counting to 10, leaving the room for 15 minutes, through to we'll pick this up again tomorrow. Needless to say, it's best not to meet anger with anger. And if you do notice yourself getting angry, then you could say something like, this is getting heated, this is not what I wanted. Can we get back on track? Or should we come back to this at some other time when we've had an opportunity to cool off? That second to last point I've got there, you may want to set boundaries about how somebody talks to you, how they treat you. And lastly, to consider what support you need in order to be able to do this, which could include help coping with their aggression and anger, as well as possibly coping with your own. Okay, I'd like to end this session by posing some questions for you to consider. The first one is to reflect on arguments and conflicts that may occur in your family, to think about the roles that maybe people adopt, how they interact with each other. Are there patterns or sequences that are familiar in terms of how arguments and conflicts play out? And use that information to consider your part in what happens. Not because I'm blaming you, because that's the part that you can do something about. If you then feel safe enough and confident enough, you may want to come on and consider ideas for how to manage and cope with those arguments and conflicts. And with that in mind, you might want to look back through that last slide. Think about what appeals to you. Plan and prepare how to use those ideas. And see if you can step out of the triangle. However, if you don't feel safe enough or confident enough to do that, then your safety is the most important thing, of course. In which case, I'd really like to encourage you to seek support and to do so as early as possible. And with that in mind, I propose you look elsewhere on the Adfam website for sources of general support, but also for specialist support with domestic abuse and domestic violence. There are agencies that specialise in this. And also on the Adfam website, there is further information and toolkits on coping with domestic abuse and domestic violence. Okay, well that concludes session number 10. Take care of yourself and bye for now.